Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Shattered Lives. I'm Paul Healy, Chief Reporter with the Irish Daily Star, and I'm joined today again by Mick O'Toole, Crime Correspondent with the Star. We're doing something of a week in review this week, and we're going to see how we go going forward. We might consider doing these on a frequent basis, hopefully a weekly basis. This is where we review the biggest crime stories of the week and stories that we've covered in the Star and the Mirror, and we speak about them in a bit more detail, give you a bit more context in relation to them. We hope you enjoy listening. So welcome back to our pod. As I said in the intro, we are now considering doing what we're calling a week in review. So we're going to talk about the biggest crime stories of the week and give a little bit of context where possible. Of course, there are, in many of these cases, there can be legal proceedings and issues legally that prevent us maybe from saying certain things. So we will go as far as we can and discuss these stories as best we can. The first story that we want to talk about is very much ongoing, and it's a terribly tragic and awful case. And we just say at the outset that I think our thoughts and sympathies are with the family of Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell, PSNI, who was shot a number of times while out with his son at an under 15s football session up there in Omagh. So it would have been, so that the time of recording this is Thursday, so it was Wednesday night when this tragedy occurred, and as things currently stand, Mr. Caldwell is in hospital. He's in a critical but stable condition, but a very, very serious incident, and one that's been met with widespread condemnation both north and south of the border. So just to update people on the facts of it before we start talking about it, as I mentioned, he was at an under-15s football session with his son in the Killyclogger Road, and he was actually putting footballs into the boot of his car when they think two gunmen approached him from behind and shot him a number of times, and he was actually then able to run away. He was trying to make his escape from these would-be hitmen and was further shot. So there are now 3 people currently in custody over this. There was a car, they escaped in a black car that was found burnt out, and that's the kind of state of play at the moment. As I said, met with widespread condemnation. The Taoiseach and the UK Prime Minister have all weighed in on it, and the GRA as well here south of the border have condemned it and called it a barbaric attack. But I might open this up to you, Mick. I mean, John Caldwell is a well-known figure, and no doubt you've come across him in your time.
Yes, he's very well known actually in the Republic. People know about the links between the Garda Síochána and the PSNI. John Caldwell was a main investigator, what we would call an SA or a senior investigating officer. He did an awful lot of high profile cases. There's one that he was involved in, but I can't really talk about it just for legal reasons, not anything to do with him, it's just who it is. But he's very, very high profile. He's been on TV, but not a lot of people would know that he was a regular visitor into the Republic, and he had very strong links with Gardaí who were involved investigating organised crime. And I know of one case he was involved in about a gang of criminals from the Dublin area who were cross-border criminals who were involved in very, very serious crime. And there were Gardaí who were investigating that gang, and they would have gone north for various hearings, court and bail hearings. And John Caldwell would have effectively been their link man, and he was regularly down in the Republic visiting senior Gardaí here. So he was involved in, really involved in issues of serious crime, but also involved in issues of serious organised crime. And I was speaking to one retired detective inspector who would know very well. He was very, very upset last night because he would have, been very close to him. He would have helped him in several investigations. So look, I think this brought back an awful lot of memories for me, because obviously I grew up in the Troubles, and I remember, if listeners remember back when we were talking about your interview with Ciaran Rowan, who admitted possessing the Kalashnikovs used in the Regency, he was talking about the Kalashnikovs, they give you a bit of distance. And if you recall, I said, well, look, one thing that the IRA, the provisional IRA as it was then, they're no longer active, and there's various other groups out there, but I was talking about how they want short weapons, what pistols are called short, so they can get up close and personal. And this is a classic example of it being up close and personal. I mean, they shot him probably, I would guess, from 5 or 10 feet away. I mean, I can remember I came down here in September 1997, and one of the last murders I covered up north was, the ceasefire was in July 97. It may have been May or June 1997. 2 RUC officers were shot dead in Lurgan in County Armagh, and they were shot in the back of the head from inches. And that's what the terrorists used to do, get up close and personal. So, and this is a classic example. It's, it's textbook. You get up and you get really, really close. So, look, he was shot repeatedly. He's critically ill in hospital. Sources I was speaking to on Wednesday night did fear the worst, but thankfully that hasn't come to pass, but he is very, very critically ill. Now, obviously there are suspects. So as I said, he did combat serious organised crime, so that would be looked at. But the PSNI have said that the main focus they're looking at is a group called the New IRA. And I think we should talk about them for a minute just to give context, because it's relevant to things we've been talking about. The New IRA came about from a group called the Real IRA, which we know bombed Omagh, killed 29 people, including a mother who was pregnant with twins. That was in August 1998. And there have been various splits and offshoots. But in 2009, they came together with a group called Republican Action Against Drugs. Now, that may ring a bell because Kevin Murray, he of the famous flat cap fame, was involved in Republican Action Against Drugs. So those two groups more or less combined to form this New IRA. Now, they don't call it. Yeah, and here's another interesting fact. We have the Real IRA, the New IRA, and then there's a group called ONH, which is an offshoot of the Real IRA. It may be of interest to you and to listeners. They don't call themselves the New IRA or the Real IRA. They call themselves the IRA. And we've spoken about this before, that when you're charged in the special, you're charged with IRA membership. But it's not, everybody thinks IRA, think the provisional IRA, but it's not. It's just any group calling itself O'Toole and Paul or the IRA. And I'm going to be a real anorak, and I'll tell you where the name the Real IRA comes from, because it's fascinating. They didn't call themselves the Real IRA. Again, they called themselves the IRA, right? And what happened was, one day, shortly after they were formed, there was a hijacking around the border, right? And they were getting the people out of the car, and they said, "We're the IRA, the Real IRA." And that's why they were called the Real IRA. As in, we are the authentic, real and original IRA. So they became known as the RERA, or the Real IRA. But they don't call themselves that. They call themselves the IRA. And that's why they're called the Real IRA.
Fascinating. So many splinter groups. It can be hard to keep up. So I think that's an important way of contextualizing it for people. Just to go back a bit, because you mentioned just that John Caldwell worked with Gardaí here south of the border. I recognise his name because I can recall him taking the witness stand in the recent trial of Jerry Hutch. Now, I'm not suggesting, I kind of got a little bit of Twitter abuse, as look, you get abuse on Twitter, that's what it's for. But
there's a surprise.
Look, I'm not suggesting any link whatsoever, other than we're just trying to tell people a bit who he is. And here south of the border, a good example of how he worked with Gardaí is this case. It's the most recent public case large public case that he would have worked in here south of the border. He gave evidence in the trial of Jerry Hutch in relation to flat cap Kevin Murray. And that is that he helped the guards who were investigating the Regency Hotel murder. He helped look through a series of photographs that were taken at the Regency of this famous flat cap shooter, and he was able to formally identify that person as Kevin Murray from Strabane. And he said that he would have known Kevin Murray from the area, from being a senior officer in the area himself. He would know who Kevin Murray was. So that's the context of that.
And it shows that the PSNI do not work in isolation. And they don't investigate.
Yes.
Ireland is a small country. I'm going 32 counties here. It's a small country. There's only 7 million of us. And there are very, very strong links. And the border doesn't really exist. And criminals and paramilitaries move around. So it does go to show the links between the two parts of the island. And you'll also remember that he also gave evidence in the trial in 2017 of Patrick Hutch, who was charged with the Regency. Now, there was an Ollie Prosecco answered. One of the reasons was the death of senior investigator Colin Fox. But he, again, gave evidence in that trial that he identified flat cap Kevin Murray from it was the Sunday World photographs. So it just goes to show you that PSNI don't work on isolation, and there's, I suppose, 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there something you wanted to add on that? You were flagging me.
Yes. People aren't really aware, it's about the size of these groups, right? So O'Toole and Paul and ONH, this offshoot of the Real IRA, they probably had about 50 members, right? But estimates for the New IRA, which is the amalgamation of the Real IRA and the Republican Action Against Drugs, they're talking about 300 members. Now, that might be a surprise to some people, but because I can remember we were at a cross-border security meeting between the PSNI and the Guards and probably MI5, I don't know. But we were asking questions, and a senior PSNI officer said, I think she picked up about 500 people being actively involved in dissidents. But you know what? The loyalist paramilitaries, I'm going to ask you a question, Paul, right? How many people do you think are active members of loyalist terrorists?
I wouldn't have a clue. That's the honest answer.
Well, say 500. Right, I don't want to be like that TV show. Go and guess. I'll tell you, right? Latest estimates, 12,500.
My God. Wow.
12, that's more than the Defence Force.
Yeah, huge.
12,500. And they're not given, and their activities probably aren't given down here, I would say respectfully to my beloved media colleagues, probably aren't given the attention that they deserve. 12,500, which is frightening. And that's an awful lot of men.
The shooting of a police officer is something that is thankfully widely condemned. I mean, this is something that, years ago probably would have been much more politicised. Thankfully, there are people from the unionist side of things that are also condemning this. It's a horrendous atrocity. And I just want to read out a statement from Brendan O'Connor, who's the president of the Garda Representative Association, because I think it captures those feelings. He says the GRA membership were shocked and dismayed to hear of this barbaric attempt to murder a police colleague, and we absolutely condemn the cowardly attack. Those who have nothing to offer other than hate and division and hate showed utter contempt and recklessness for the wider community and young people in Omagh by their actions. So I think that sums it up better than anything we can maybe add to that. Moving on, just to other stories of the week, when we can talk about the recent arrest of Katrina Kerry. Now, you were across this a bit during the week, Mick. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so Miss Kerry, she's a convicted fraudster. She was done for altering a cheque and cashing it in February 2020, but obviously she's been at the centre. Prime Time did a lot of stuff about this mortgage company she had. She had a company. Now, she was arrested on Wednesday. Now, it's really, really interesting. Obviously, we know various state bodies have powers of arrest, okay? Principally the Garda Síochána, okay? But there is a group called the Competitions Authority, and they have powers of arrest. It used to be the Office of Corporate Enforcement. And they arrested Miss Kerry on Wednesday. So it was for alleged breaches of company law. Now that's something that's very, very complicated, but so that means that in a way it's like if it is a crime, it's a victimless crime because it's sort of procedural thing. But they did arrest her, and they will be sending, or they can send a file to the Director of Public Prosecutions, just like Gardaí. And it's up to the DPP, it's up to the CEA to send, and then the DPP has to decide. But parallel to that, we know that the Garda Economic Crime Bureau is also mounting its own criminal investigation.
It's a separate.
Yeah, it's a separate one. And look, she hasn't been arrested over that. And who knows the way investigations go? But people have made allegations that they have suffered financially as a result of her actions. So look, we'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah, she was just suspected of scamming up to 30 people out of 400,000 euro. Now, she has come out and spoken in the past and said that she was the fall guy for somebody else, but look, she's obviously under investigation for these allegations.
And there is an investigation, but there'll be no arrest yet.
Yeah. Now, she can be named. I think it's important to state that she can be named because she already has a conviction in relation to fraud. So, just to explain, sometimes people wonder why certain people are named and other people maybe aren't named. She already has a conviction in relation to fraud, and she's a well-known figure and has spoken on this subject. Therefore, I suppose media outlets have greater leeway when it comes to naming her. We'll move on perhaps to just, we discussed maybe talking about this on Monday. I had a story in relation to Daniel Kinahan. He's never out of the papers. We constantly hear things, and so I just think it's worth talking about. It's maybe not a surprise to you, Mick, because you had a somewhat similar story maybe just a couple of was it maybe a couple of months ago, in relation to Kinahan's movements. But I was told that in recent weeks he was spotted in the Palm Islands area of Dubai, and that he is frequently out there publicly playing football with his cousin Ian Dixon. Now, Ian Dixon was sanctioned by the US Treasury Department, the same as Kinahan, a company associated with him called Duckashoe Limited, probably mispronouncing that, but was sanctioned by the US government, and he's considered to be a financier and somebody who works very closely with Daniel Kinahan and is his first cousin. So I'm told that the two of them hang out all the time, that they're constantly in each other's company, and that for the moment Kinahan seems to be staying put in spite of the fact that he's been sanctioned by authorities in the UAE as well and had bank accounts frozen, and much of his professional life when it comes to the boxing industry has been completely torn apart as a result of these sanctions. He hasn't gone anywhere though, which I don't know if that's surprising to you, Mick.
Well,
that he hasn't fled.
It sort of shows how difficult it is for us in many occasions to find out what is actually happening, because there were reports from a very credible paper that he had left Dubai and that he was moving around the area. And do you know what?
Qatar and
and then do you remember? I won't go into it, but you and I hear things, and some things don't reach the threshold that we can print, right? But you remember I told you, but somebody contacted me and said he's in a certain location in Dubai on a certain day of the week. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Right, and that was a bit of a oh my god, right, because of what that entailed. Now, it's a nightmare in effect, because if you say he's gone, he could turn up the next morning. If you say he's in the country, he could turn up. Remember, we had there's been stuff about about Christie going to Zimbabwe and having setting up a headquarters there. It's entirely chaotic. So who knows? And look, and if you remember, just to run through a second, you remember last week a fella in Dundalk admitted giving Daniel Kinahan his or in fact being involved in Daniel Kinahan using his passport, his photograph. So he obviously has access then to documents, and that was used up until I think 2017, from 2010, 2011. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that he has other passports. Do you know what? Who knows? I mean, we have to go on what we hear.
I can only tell you that he was spotted in Dubai, and that doesn't mean that he hasn't been moving around elsewhere. Maybe potentially he has, but it's interesting that he doesn't appear to have fled Dubai for good, in spite of everything that's happened. And also, just on the foot of that, I understand that the government will be sending a representative to the United Arab Emirates for St. Patrick's Day. So you know that members of the government go all over the world for St. Patrick's Day. So there will be a minister going to Dubai, and it's anticipated that there might be some backroom talks between diplomats and authorities there, and we know that that's been ongoing, that's been happening. And I think, Mick, you even had a story way back when that was going on.
Yeah, that there were efforts underway to backdoor diplomacy, I suppose. But also there's two other I think are significant events. Firstly, this was flag posted. We flag posted it ourselves, I think, in 2019. The Guards are sending a liaison officer to the United Arab Emirates permanently to liaise with UAE law enforcement, and that can only mean more cooperation. We also know that the UAE have an ambassador at Europol, and Ireland is part of it. Is part of the Europol. It's all the European police forces, and he's there, constantly. So they're all trying to increase the cooperation. So let's see what happens. But I think maybe the UAE are probably feeling under a bit of pressure, just about the whole perception that criminals from all over the place, because we know about Raffaele Imperiale, the Italian guy who was linked to Kinahan, who's been extradited. So, maybe the pressure's beginning to tell. So we'll see. Perhaps
so. Just on that subject, I will be slightly cautious about the way I talk about this, but I had a story also that, in relation to a new boxing company which has emerged from Dubai, and I just think it's interesting to talk about briefly just that there has been a vacuum, so to speak, in the sport, because MTK Global, which was co-founded by Kinahan and Matthew Macklin, was effectively a powerhouse, and the only real powerhouse in boxing. It had a huge stable of boxers, including Tyson Fury, to their name. But when it came to the sanctions that were imposed last April, the company, lots of people cut ties with the company, and ultimately it folded. And then another company came in called Probellum, and they took on a lot of the fighters. Both of these companies denied having any connections to Kinahan, but they lost out on fights and they had deals revoked, and Probellum got itself into hot water. And now that company has had many of its assets taken over by this other company. And this new CEO has come forward, and he's based out of Dubai. And we put it to him, have you any links to Daniel Kinahan? Has the company any links to Daniel Kinahan? He came back denying knowing or having any personal or professional links with Daniel Kinahan. So it's interesting because that company now is claiming to be effectively hoovering up all of the talent and taking advantage of the vacuum that has been left there by, I suppose, the lack of Daniel Kinahan and MTK Global, which was as I said, a powerhouse and a great thing for boxers. And now there is, there is a power gap there.
And it's hard, us as crime reporters, we weren't experts in this, but we were watching it. The growth of it started off as MGM, Macklin and Daniel Kinahan. I think it was 2012 they set it up. And then 2017, I think, after the feud started, Kinahan issued a statement saying he divested himself and he'd gotten rid of it. And those people came along and got very annoyed about any allegations or claims that there were links to it. But then Bob Yallum, when the whole thing came along, Bob Yallum and all was talking about how, Daniel Kinahan was heavily up to use the phrase, up to his docksters in boxing and stuff, So it's just really interesting to look back at that, I find, because it was a very strange period. The number of people, especially on Twitter and so, who were batting for Daniel Kinahan. It was just, and then I just find it fascinating.
Lots of denials, but I will just point out that when these sanctions were imposed, we learned a lot about the Kinahans and their investments and properties they owned. And in an office that Daniel Kinahan owned, files showed Daniel Kinahan owned an office in Dubai, and the address and everything, and it was the exact same registered address as MTK Global's headquarters in Dubai. So make of that what you will.
And then it folded. MTK folded.
Yes, then it folded.
It was about a month after the sanctions.
Yes, a month after.
It was pretty quick.
Yeah,
because the American fella resigned, didn't he, as CEO? And then that was it, Sinead.
Yeah, and as I said, now there seems to be a power vacuum, and this company is coming in trying to take over in effect. So we'll see what happens there. That's all I can really say in relation to that.
So we can talk about another case, a separate case. This GAA legend who was arrested on Wednesday on suspicion of defrauding people. Essentially, the story is he is alleged to have told people that he was suffering from cancer and he needed money to get to America for treatment. Now, there has been
a million
up
quid,
to $1 million quid. You see, probably yes, it's a lot of money, right? And I think more people are coming out of the order, but more people are coming forward. There was an operation against him on December 14th. In a certain part of Ireland. We can't even say that. But he wasn't arrested, but there has been an ongoing investigation. And it was actually our colleague, John Ciaran, broke it in the Mirror 2 weeks ago. And since then, there has been feverish speculation as to who this was, but we can't name him. And we just can't. And people sometimes, I think, get frustrated about that. But let me tell you, Ireland's defamation laws mean that it's very... I've been looking at all the coverage. All the papers, broadsheets and tabloids and, the national broadcaster and everything have been skirting around the issue. And we're not trying to protect anybody. We just don't want to be sued. And to be frank, it's more likely that, a newspaper or a radio station will be sued than Seamus435762 on Twitter, who has 3 followers. And that's just the grim reality. So people like suing people like us. So that's why we have to be careful.
Also, it was reported by other outlets that this individual, prior to this arrest, there were mental health concerns there as well. So, we have to approach these things with sensitivity as well, not just legally, but for other reasons. So this person was approached for comment. And their family was reached, and it was determined that this person was receiving help for mental health issues. So it's not as though journalists weren't chasing this person, trying to get them to comment. They were. So it's not like everybody was just trying to, as I say, protect somebody's identity. Efforts were made to contact this person and to put the allegations to him and to ultimately publish them prior to his arrest.
And I would go to bed on a Saturday night fully expecting the person, to maybe have spoken to a Sunday paper, and that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So, that's just...
Yeah. Moving on, we'll talk briefly about the Ballyfermot incident. This is another horrendous incident of Gardaí being attacked by thugs in the street. This isn't the first time this has happened in recent months, but you were covering that a bit, Mick.
Yeah, I got the video. We put it up on the Mirror website, and there was a lot of interest in it. And I think the fact that there was so much interest in it shows I think people were shocked by it. Anybody like me or you and I would know the views of probably hundreds of Gardaí between us. We'll put it that way, right? That's not abnormal. Okay, he did get hit with a bottle in the face. That was abnormal. But the grief they were getting, guards get this all the time. I mean, I remember a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, a video emerged. I think it was at one of these anti-asylum seeker protests. And there was a fella, and he was given these, and he was videoing it, or it was being videoed. He was giving these guards dogs abuse. I mean, he was giving them, hocking them, giving them socks. And the guards just stood there and accepted it. And my rationale has always been, lads, because that everybody was going, oh my God, that's terrible. Guards get that every single day of the week. Every single day, Gardaí are harassed and abused and threatened and everything. And it's only when, that we broadcast it or it's highlighted that people will go, oh my God, this is terrible. Welcome to the real world. This happens every single day. So guards, you and I probably were speaking to, probably were less, excited by this than the average public, because for them it's their reality. Every guard has the story, something similar that happened to them. Would you agree?
Yeah, I haven't said that. I mean, there was an eagerness, I suppose, to highlight it because, as you said, it happens every day. So when there is an opportunity maybe to highlight that it's happening, they're happy to do that because... Look, there's always going to be a lack of respect there from a certain generation of thugs, and as you said, that's something they have to deal with. But it should be widely condemned. And look, I note that there is that a certain minister recently stated that the guards wouldn't be getting body cams or. Sorry, not body cams. That the guards wouldn't be getting tasers, and
tasers,
and that's something that GRA members have been calling for a long time. Guards really do feel that may help them out in situations like this. But sure, look, as you said, it's an ongoing problem. It happens every day. This is just one other example of it, sadly.
Yeah, there's guards are not shown respect, and people think that wearing a uniform enables people to say what they want to them. I mean, that's just, we see it all the time. We see videos and people tell us stories all the time. And whenever I occasionally tweet and say, lads, this is nothing out of the ordinary. Number of messages I get from guards going, listen, you're absolutely right. This is our norm.
Shall we talk about Cornelius Price briefly? I know we did a pod on him earlier in the week, but just to update people, it's now being reported that his funeral may well take place in the County Louth area, which will obviously be a massive Garda operation entailed. We have yet to corroborate those reports, but I've read it in the Irish Times that it may well happen here, even though he died in the UK. So we haven't got a date for that yet, but no doubt there would be a huge security operation in place in relation to that. Obviously a very dangerous figure, and with that comes associates who are equally as dangerous. And Nicola Donnelly, our colleague, had a report there as well in relation to a pastor who supposedly gave effectively last rites to Cornelius Price, and it gave a bit of an insight into his last days in hospital and how he, I suppose, converted to being somewhat of an evangelical Christian despite being in a coma, and repenting from all of his sins, again despite being in a coma, before he died. Having said that, this pastor was apparently completely unaware of Cornelius Price's past criminal activities, and when Nicola put that to him, he expressed his shock and disbelief, but said he still would have gone to the hospital and carried out his services even if he had known those facts in advance.
And he did put up, wasn't there? It might have been on his page. There was a video of I think of a group of people at Price's deathbed, singing hymns and that sort of stuff. So look, he obviously he was, he was one of his flock. I'll put it that way. So I suppose is doing his bit for him. But when people might not comment on him not knowing anything about Mr. Price and his background. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this is, Paul and I, we're sprinting every day, stories wise, and so we do stories every single day, and sometimes you sort of forget. But sometimes it happens. You forget about stories you did 4 or 5 days ago, and it's only when you look back and you go, people might not have heard about this. So one story that may have passed people by, Paul did a story a few weeks ago. There was a lady called Miriam Burns who was murdered in her home in Killarney in County Kerry in last August. And Paul did a story, it was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, wasn't it, about a suspect being taken out of prison, this famous Section 42 warrant. The guards had to get this warrant to go and bring somebody out and then arrest them. And he was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Miss Burns. And I got a story late last week, or at the early start of this week. That man has now been released from prison. So he's out now. What I can say is there has been a file sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions on that. Just to explain, the local superintendent, when there's any file, the local superintendent in charge of the case usually puts in, at the end of the file, a recommendation. So I recommend X be charged with, or I recommend that there's not evidence enough to be charged with, but it's for the Director of Public Prosecutions to decide. So our understanding is that there has been a recommendation in that file that there be a charge. And that is now with the Director of Public Prosecutions. Could take a month, could take 6 months. How long is a piece of string? But we understand that it has progressed to that level, and the guards have, made a recommendation.
Yeah, a very unusual case, but it does appear to be advancing. That person is currently out now, but as we've mentioned in our reports, that person is known to Miss Burns, the victim, and has been now interviewed at length in relation to it. So we'll follow that as it progresses. So yeah, we're going to continue to do this hopefully on a weekly basis. I think it's a good idea to kind of reflect on the week in crime. Might even give us ideas for future stories. I think just it's worth just reiterating again that our thoughts go to the family of John Caldwell, and hopefully he recovers. Hopefully the persons responsible as well are brought to justice in relation to it. And you want to add there, Mick?
Well, just I'm looking forward to this. As I say, we want to try and contextualise things, and hopefully share our knowledge on various things. And it's good, as I say, we're always rushing. And look, we will be doing plenty of interviews. We've got probably 3 really good interviews lined up for separate pods in the coming weeks. But I just think it's nice just to, it might be instructive just to sort of stop and breathe and look back and try and bring context and explain what is happening in the world of Irish crime. But one thing's for sure, there'll be plenty to talk about. Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, as always.
And also, just before I go, if anybody has any ideas for any areas they want us to talk about, we really do value the links and the connections we have with the people who listen to the pod. And, Shattered Lives would be nothing without the people who listen. So if anybody has anything, just DM me or Paul or Ciaran Bradley or August, producer, and we'll be more than happy to see what we can do.
Yep. Thank you.